The fog rolled in like a living thing. Marcus Reed watched from the 23rd floor of the federal building as the unnatural mist swallowed downtown Washington, block by block. One moment, the morning rush hour streamed through the streets below in its usual chaotic rhythm. The next, an impenetrable wall of gray-white vapor consumed everything. Cars, buildings, people, leaving only an eerie silence where the city's heartbeat should have been. His secure phone buzzed. The display showed only a single letter. H. "Marcus here," he answered, never taking his eyes off the impossible scene below. "Conference room 7. Now." Director Hayes's voice carried its usual authority, but Marcus caught the underlying tension. In 15 years of working for the man, he'd learned to read the subtle variations in that gravelly tone. This wasn't just urgent, it was personal. Marcus pocketed the phone and grabbed his jacket. The elevator ride down felt longer than usual, his reflection in the polished steel doors showing a man who looked younger than his 42 years, despite the gray threading through his dark hair. The job had kept him sharp, but it had also taught him to recognize when the rules of the game were about to change completely. Conference Room 7 occupied a windowless corner of the building's secure floor. When Marcus pushed through the reinforced door, he found Director Hayes studying a wall of monitors displaying news feeds from around the world. Every screen showed the same thing: cities wrapped in impossible fog, reporters struggling to make sense of what they were witnessing. 7 major metropolitan areas, Hayes said without turning around: London, Paris, Berlin, Tokyo, Sydney, Toronto, and now us, all within the past 72 hours. Marcus took his usual seat at the oval table. Natural phenomenon? Hayes finally turned, his weathered face grim. The fog dissipates after exactly 2 hours. No meteorological explanation. No chemical residue. And here's the interesting part. He clicked a remote, changing all the screens to medical reports. Every person caught in the fog experiences temporary but complete blindness during exposure. No lasting damage, but for those 2 hours, they might as well not exist. "That's not natural," Marcus said. "No, it's not. And neither is this." Hayes slid a tablet across the table. The screen showed satellite imagery of a cargo ship, its deck stacked with shipping containers. This vessel was tracked leaving a port in Montenegro 3 weeks ago. Yesterday, it was spotted 12 miles off the Virginia coast. This morning, right before our fog rolled in, it disappeared from our satellites completely. Marcus studied the image. Something about the ship's configuration bothered him. Too many containers for its size, positioned in patterns that didn't optimize space or weight distribution. "You think someone's using the fog as cover?" "I think someone's been testing their new toy in other cities, and now they're ready for the main event here. The question is why." The door opened and 3 people entered. Marcus recognized them immediately. His usual team for the operations that officially didn't exist. Julia Santos moved with the confident stride of someone who'd earned her reputation as the best intelligence analyst in the building. Her dark eyes missed nothing, and her ability to see patterns in chaos had saved more lives than anyone would ever know. Behind her, Captain Blake's military bearing remained as precise as his reputation with weapons and tactics. The man could probably field-strip a rifle blindfolded, and had likely done so. Tony Richardson brought up the rear, his deliberately forgettable appearance the perfect camouflage for his role as their street-level specialist. "The gang's all here," Marcus said, though his tone carried none of its usual lightness. Julia took the seat across from him. "We've been monitoring communications intercepts since the fog started. Nothing concrete, but there's been unusual encrypted traffic on frequencies typically used by arms dealers." "Arms dealers?" Marcus leaned forward. "What kind of arms?" Blake cleared his throat. "The kind that don't show up in conventional weapons databases. We're talking about technology that's still theoretical in most circles. Hayes moved to the head of the table. "Gentlemen, lady, we're dealing with something unprecedented. Someone has developed a weapon that can render entire populations helpless without permanent harm. The applications are obvious. Imagine deploying this before a conventional invasion, or during a political coup, or during a heist," Tony added quietly. 2 hours of blind civilians and emergency services. You could steal anything, go anywhere. Marcus felt the familiar tightening in his chest that came with high-stakes operations. "What's our mission? Find them. Stop them. And do it before they demonstrate whatever else they have planned." Hayes's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "We have reason to believe they're still in the DC area. The fog pattern suggests they need proximity to their targets." Julia opened her laptop. "I've been tracking anomalous rental patterns in the area. Industrial spaces, warehouses, anything with the power infrastructure to support advanced equipment. I have 17 potential locations." "We'll start with the most isolated ones," Blake said, already thinking tactically. "If they're testing weapons of this caliber, they'll want privacy." Marcus stood, his mind already shifting into operational mode. The banter and casual attitude that made him effective in normal circumstances had no place here. Lives hung in the balance, potentially millions of lives. "Rules of engagement?" he asked Hayes. "Whatever it takes." "But Marcus—" Hayes caught his arm as he headed for the door. "Be careful. Whoever did this is playing by rules we don't understand yet. They're several steps ahead of us, and they know we're coming." As the team filed out, Marcus lingered for a moment, studying the satellite image of the mysterious ship one more time. Something nagged at him about the way those containers were arranged. Not random, not optimized for cargo, positioned like pieces on a chessboard. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The fog was just a greeting. "The real game starts now." Marcus showed the message to Hayes, who paled slightly. "How did they get this number?" Hayes asked. "That's what we're going to find out," Marcus replied, pocketing the phone. But as he walked toward the elevator, he couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't hunting their enemy. They were being hunted. The elevator doors closed with a soft chime, and Marcus caught his reflection again in the polished steel. The man looking back at him carried the same face, but everything else had changed. The comfortable world of routine operations and manageable threats had just evaporated like morning mist. Outside, Washington, D.C. continued its normal rhythm, completely unaware that somewhere in their city, an invisible enemy was preparing to turn their world upside down. 2 hours later, Marcus found himself crouched behind a rusted shipping container in an abandoned warehouse district along the Potomac. The GPS coordinates Julia had provided led to a sprawling industrial complex that had been vacant for months, the perfect place to hide something you didn't want found. Thermal imaging shows 3 heat signatures inside the main building. Blake's voice crackled through his earpiece. 2 stationary, 1 moving in a regular pattern. Could be guards. Marcus adjusted his tactical vest and checked his weapon. The team had split up to cover more ground. Julia monitoring communications from their mobile command post, Tony working his contacts in the city's underground networks, and Blake providing overwatch from a neighboring rooftop. "Any sign of our missing cargo ship?" Marcus whispered into his throat mic. "Negative," Julia responded, "but I'm picking up some interesting electronic signatures. Someone's running high-powered equipment in there, way more than you'd need for a simple warehouse operation." Marcus moved closer to the building, staying in the shadows cast by towering cranes that hadn't moved in years. The place felt wrong, too quiet, too clean for an abandoned site. Fresh tire tracks marked the dirt around the loading dock, and the security cameras he'd spotted weren't the cheap deterrent models you'd expect to find. "Blake, you seeing this?" Marcus pointed to a series of small vents built into the warehouse's north wall. That's industrial-grade air filtration. What kind of storage needs that level of environmental control? The kind that involves chemical weapons, Blake replied grimly. A chill ran down Marcus's spine that had nothing to do with the autumn wind off the river. He'd dealt with conventional terrorists before, men driven by ideology or desperation. But someone with access to biochemical weapons played by different rules entirely. His phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. Getting warmer. But are you ready for what you'll find? Marcus showed the message to Blake through their shared tactical display. His partner's response was immediate. They're tracking us. We need to assume they know exactly where we are. Then let's give them something to track, Marcus said, his voice carrying the edge of determination that his team knew meant the game was changing. I'm going in. Marcus, wait. But he was already moving. Years of training took over as he approached the warehouse's service entrance. The lock looked standard, but Marcus's practiced eye caught the small electronic component hidden beneath the handle. A proximity sensor. Not an alarm. Something more sophisticated. He carefully avoided triggering it and picked the mechanical backup instead. The door opened silently on well-oiled hinges. Inside, the warehouse stretched into darkness, broken only by the glow of computer monitors. The air hummed with the sound of expensive equipment running at full capacity. Marcus activated his night vision and began cataloging what he saw. Laboratory benches, chemical storage units, and at the far end, a series of metal containers that looked disturbingly similar to the ones from the satellite photos of the missing cargo ship. Jesus, he breathed into his mic. Blake, I think we found their lab. Movement caught his eye, one of the heat signatures Blake had detected. A figure in a hazmat suit worked at a computer terminal, completely absorbed in whatever data scrolled across the screen. Marcus drew his weapon and began moving closer, using the equipment as cover. That's when he saw the test tubes. Dozens of them, arranged in precise rows, each containing what looked like concentrated fog. The same unnatural gray-white vapor that had blinded 7 cities around the world. But these samples were different. Some glowed faintly green. Others had a reddish tint that made Marcus's stomach turn. They're not just making the fog, he whispered. They're improving it. The figure at the computer suddenly stiffened and began typing rapidly. Marcus realized with growing alarm that the person wasn't working on the fog formula. They were monitoring communications, including his team's encrypted channel. Blake, we're compromised. The lights blazed on, flooding the warehouse with harsh fluorescent brilliance. Marcus spun around to find himself facing 3 masked figures, each carrying weapons he didn't recognize. Sleek devices that looked more like something from a science fiction movie than conventional firearms. Drop your weapon, one of them commanded, the voice artificially modulated. You're trespassing on private property. Marcus kept his pistol trained on the nearest figure. Private property? Last I checked, developing biochemical weapons was illegal on any property. Biochemical weapons? The figure tilted their head with what might have been amusement. Agent Reed, you have such a limited imagination. The use of his name sent ice through Marcus's veins. These people knew exactly who he was. What do you want? He demanded. We want to show the world something beautiful, the figure replied. A demonstration of what happens when you remove chaos from the equation, when you eliminate the unpredictable human element from any scenario. One of the other figures raised their strange weapon. Marcus dove for cover behind a lab bench, just as a bolt of energy sizzled past his head, leaving a smoking crater in the concrete wall behind him. Blake! Marcus shouted into his comm as he returned fire. I need an exit now. Working on it. Blake's voice came back strained, but we've got company out here too. 3 vehicles just pulled up, and they're not here for a social call. Marcus rolled to a new position as another energy blast destroyed the equipment where he'd been hiding. Chemical vapors began hissing from broken containers, and he caught a whiff of something that made his eyes water and his throat burn. "The fog," he gasped into his mic. "They're weaponizing it with other compounds. Julia, we need hazmat teams and a containment protocol. Now!" "On it!" Julia's voice crackled back. "But Marcus, I'm showing more heat signatures converging on your location." "A lot more." Through the smoke and chaos, Marcus saw the truth with crystalline clarity. This wasn't just a laboratory, it was a trap. They'd been led here deliberately, drawn in by carefully planted clues and their own determination to stop the threat. "Blake, Tony," he said, fighting to keep his voice steady as he moved toward what looked like an emergency exit. "This is bigger than we thought. They're not just testing weapons, they're testing us." A new voice cut through his earpiece, cold and cultured, with just a hint of an unidentifiable accent. "Very good, Agent Reed." Few people would have recognized the pattern so quickly. Marcus froze. This wasn't one of his team. "Who is this?" "Someone who appreciates competence," the voice replied. "You may call me the Shadow Master. I've been looking forward to meeting you." The warehouse around Marcus erupted in chaos as smoke began pouring from the broken chemical containers. Through the haze, he could see his attackers moving with military precision, cutting off his escape routes one by one. "Your reputation precedes you," the Shadow Master continued conversationally, "but I'm afraid your investigation ends here. My associates will ensure you're comfortable while we discuss your role in the next phase of our demonstration." Marcus spotted a skylight 30 feet above him. It was his only chance. "Blake," he said, chambering a fresh round, "remember that crazy extraction we did in Prague? The one that nearly got us both killed? Please tell me you're not—" "Cover me." Marcus sprinted toward a stack of chemical barrels, using them as stepping stones to reach a support beam. Behind him, energy blasts lit up the warehouse like deadly fireworks. Above him, Blake's sniper rifle cracked 3 times in rapid succession, taking out the security lights and plunging sections of the building back into darkness. But as Marcus hauled himself toward the skylight, he realized the Shadow Master was right about one thing. This wasn't an ending. It was barely the beginning. His secure phone, still clipped to his vest, buzzed with one final message. "Your friend Tony sends his regards. He's quite comfortable in his new accommodations." Marcus's blood ran cold. Tony had been monitoring the docks on the other side of the city. If the Shadow Master had him— "Blake, we need to go," Marcus said, finally reaching the skylight. "They've got Tony." As he crashed through the glass and onto the warehouse roof, Marcus could hear the Shadow Master's laughter echoing through his earpiece, a sound that promised this game was far from over. The abandoned metro tunnel beneath Arlington stretched into darkness like the throat of some massive beast. Marcus checked his tactical display one more time. Tony's tracking signal had gone dead here, 2 levels below the city's forgotten Cold War infrastructure. "Julia, what's our communication status?" Marcus whispered into his throat mic as he descended the rusted maintenance ladder. "Intermittent at best," came her crackling response. "These tunnels are shielded, probably intentionally. I can maintain contact for maybe another 50 yards, then you're on your own." Blake dropped silently beside him, night vision goggles already in place. Motion sensors are showing movement patterns ahead. Multiple contacts, moving in organized sweeps. Professional. Marcus nodded grimly. They'd traced Tony's last known position to a public parking garage, where security footage showed him being forced into a black SUV by 3 masked figures. The vehicle's GPS tracker led them to this access point, a hidden entrance Julia had discovered in the city's classified infrastructure database. "Remember," Marcus said as they moved deeper into the tunnel, "Tony's our priority, but we need intel on what the Shadow Master is really planning. Those enhanced fog formulas we saw were just the beginning." The tunnel opened into a wider chamber that hadn't appeared on any of the schematics Julia had accessed. Modern lighting ran along newly installed conduits, and the air carried the hum of sophisticated electronics. Someone had spent serious money converting this forgotten space into something functional. Blake held up a closed fist, the signal for enemy contact. Through the shadows ahead, Marcus could see two guards positioned at what looked like a blast door. Their weapons were the same energy-based devices from the warehouse, but their posture suggested military training. Marcus pulled out his phone and typed a quick message to Julia. Found underground facility. Going silent. If no contact in 30 minutes, initiate Protocol 7. Protocol 7 was their code for a full federal response. Hazmat teams, tactical units, the works. It would blow their covert investigation wide open, but at least it would prevent a catastrophe if things went wrong. The phone buzzed with Julia's response. Roger. Marcus, be careful. Something's not right about this whole situation. Blake tapped Marcus's shoulder and pointed to an air vent 20 feet above them. It was large enough for a person and positioned to bypass the guard post entirely. Marcus nodded and boosted Blake up to the grate. Within minutes, Blake had silently neutralized both guards using his specialized equipment, a device that disrupted the nervous system without permanent damage. They dragged the unconscious men into the shadows and approached the blast door. Biometric scanner, Blake observed, studying the entry system. But look at this! He pointed to a small panel beside the main lock. Backup mechanical override. Almost like they wanted someone to be able to get in. Another trap? Marcus asked. Maybe. Or maybe they're just confident we won't live long enough for it to matter. The door opened with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a corridor that belonged in a high-tech laboratory rather than an abandoned tunnel. LED strips provided clean, bright illumination, and the walls were lined with monitors displaying streams of data Marcus didn't recognize. They moved forward in tactical formation, checking each doorway as they passed. Most opened onto empty rooms or storage areas, but one contained something that made Marcus's blood run cold. A scale model of Washington, D.C., with specific buildings marked in red. The White House, the Pentagon, the CDC headquarters, and a dozen other critical facilities. Blake, Marcus whispered, take pictures of everything. As Blake documented the model, Marcus noticed a familiar symbol etched into the corner of the display case. The same marking they'd found at the warehouse, but with additional elements. Not just the Shadow Master's signature, but coordinates. His secure phone buzzed with a new message. Having fun yet? Your friend is quite comfortable. Would you like to join him for the grand finale? The message included an attachment. A live video feed showing Tony bound to a chair in what looked like an underground amphitheater. He appeared unharmed but drugged, his eyes unfocused. Behind him, Marcus could see banks of equipment and several figures in hazmat suits working with containers that glowed with the same unnatural light as the enhanced fog samples. But it was the figure standing beside Tony that made Marcus's chest tighten. Director Hayes stepped into frame, his familiar face wearing an expression Marcus had never seen before. Cold satisfaction mixed with something that looked disturbingly like pride. "Hello, Marcus," Hayes said to the camera. "I imagine you're feeling quite confused right now. Let me provide some clarity." Marcus grabbed Blake's arm, showing him the phone screen. Blake's face went white. "I've been working with the Shadow Masters organization for quite some time," Hayes continued. "Your team's investigation has been invaluable in helping us test our security protocols and refine our operational procedures. Every move you've made, every discovery you've reached, has been carefully orchestrated." The video feed switched to a different angle, showing the amphitheater from above. Marcus could see dozens of people in white coats working with equipment that looked far more advanced than anything in the warehouse lab. "You see, the fog attacks weren't tests of a weapon," Hayes explained. They were tests of a delivery system. The real payload is much more sophisticated, a compound that doesn't just blind temporarily, but rewrites neural pathways permanently. Imagine a population that's not just compliant, but genuinely grateful for their compliance. Marcus felt sick. This wasn't about selling weapons to foreign governments. This was about re-engineering human consciousness itself. But we needed to know if conventional security forces could detect our operations, Hayes continued. So we created a threat assessment using the best team available, yours. Every close call, every narrow escape, every moment you thought you were gaining ground was carefully calibrated to push your capabilities to their limits. The video feed zoomed in on Tony, who appeared to be fighting the effects of whatever they'd given him. His lips were moving, though no sound came through. "Your friend is trying to tell you something," Hayes said with amusement. "He figured out part of our plan before we sedated him. Something about a timetable. Would you like to guess what he discovered?" Blake's tactical display lit up with an incoming message from Julia. "Marcus, I'm showing massive electromagnetic buildup from your location. Whatever they're doing down there, it's about to go active." Marcus looked around the corridor with new eyes. The data streams on the monitors, the precise timing of their investigation, even the ease with which they'd found this facility. It was all part of a larger design. "The presidential address," Marcus realized aloud. "Tonight's joint session of Congress. They're not targeting random buildings, they're targeting the entire federal government while it's assembled in one place." Blake's expression hardened. "We need to get out of here and warn everyone." But as they turned to retreat, the blast door they'd entered through began to seal with a grinding mechanical sound. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing the corridor in pulsing red. "I'm afraid your role in our experiment isn't quite finished," the Shadow Master's voice echoed through hidden speakers, no longer disguised. "You've provided excellent data on federal response capabilities. Now we need to test our containment protocols." Vents in the ceiling began hissing, releasing a faint mist that glowed with the same sickly light as the enhanced fog samples. Marcus and Blake immediately covered their faces with their tactical masks, but Marcus knew it was a temporary measure at best. His phone buzzed one final time. "Don't worry, you'll understand everything soon. The confusion will fade, and you'll see how much better the world can be without the chaos of free will." As the mist thickened around them, Marcus realized they weren't just trying to rescue Tony anymore. They were racing to prevent the complete subjugation of the American government, and they were running out of time. "Blake," Marcus said, his voice muffled by the tactical mask, "we need to find another way out, and we need to find it now." Through the red-tinted haze, he could see more blast doors sealing throughout the facility. But somewhere in this underground maze, Tony was still alive, and the Shadow Master's plan was moving into its final phase. The hunt had become a race against time itself. Session 4. Breaking Point. Marcus's tactical mask was already showing red warning indicators. The enhanced fog wasn't just filling the corridor, it was actively seeking them out, flowing like liquid mercury around corners and through gaps they hadn't even noticed. "Blake, we've got maybe 5 minutes before this stuff overwhelms our filters," Marcus said, studying the facility's emergency lighting system. Each red pulse revealed more details about their underground prison: reinforced walls, redundant security systems, and ventilation shafts that were too small for human passage. Blake was examining something he'd found embedded in the wall, a maintenance panel that looked newer than everything else. "Marcus, look at this. Emergency fire suppression system, but it's been modified." He pulled out a small device from his kit and connected it to the panel's diagnostic port. "Someone's rigged it to disperse gas instead of suppress flames. Can you reverse it? Give me 30 seconds." Blake's fingers flew over his device's interface. "If I can flip the input commands, maybe we can clear some of this fog and buy ourselves time." Marcus moved to cover the corridor while Blake worked, his weapon trained on the blast door they'd entered through. The enhanced fog was making him feel lightheaded, despite the mask, and he could see similar effects on Blake. Slightly slowed movements, delayed reactions. Whatever this compound was, it worked fast. "Got it!" Blake announced. The ventilation system's hum changed pitch, and Marcus could see the fog beginning to thin as powerful fans reversed direction, pulling the contaminated air toward filtration systems that had been designed to handle chemical threats. But their relief was short-lived. The blast door they'd been watching began to cycle open with a mechanical grinding sound. "Time to go," Marcus said, grabbing Blake's arm. "Which way to that amphitheater?" Blake consulted his tactical display. The video feed showed multiple levels. "Based on the facility's layout, we need to go deeper." They moved through the clearing corridor, passing more rooms filled with equipment Marcus didn't recognize. Screens showing brain wave patterns, chemical analysis readouts, and what looked like population distribution maps of major cities. The scope of the Shadow Master's operation was far larger than they'd imagined. "Marcus?" Blake said suddenly, stopping at an observation window. "Look at this." Through reinforced glass, they could see into the amphitheater Hayes had shown them in the video. But the scene was different now. Dozens of technicians in hazmat suits worked frantically around equipment that pulsed with the same unnatural light as the enhanced fog. At the center of it all sat Tony, now conscious but restrained in a chair surrounded by monitoring devices. And standing beside him, no longer wearing a mask, was the Shadow Master himself. Marcus had expected someone physically imposing, but the man below was almost disappointingly ordinary. Average height, unremarkable features, the kind of person who could disappear in any crowd. It was only when he turned toward their observation window, as if sensing their presence, that Marcus saw what made him dangerous. His eyes held the cold certainty of someone who genuinely believed he was saving the world. "Agent Reed," the Shadow Master's voice came through speakers in the observation room. "I wondered when you'd find your way here. Please, come down and join us. Your friend has been asking for you." "It's a trap," Blake said quietly. "Everything's been a trap," Marcus replied. "But Tony's down there, and in—" He checked his watch. 43 minutes. Congress convenes for the joint session. We're out of time for clever plans. The entrance to the amphitheater was through an airlock system designed to maintain sterile conditions. As they passed through the decontamination cycle, Marcus could see Tony more clearly. His friend was fighting the effects of whatever they'd given him, his eyes tracking their movements with obvious relief. "Welcome to the future, gentlemen," the Shadow Master said as they entered the main space. His voice carried no accent now, but there was something in his precise diction that suggested English wasn't his first language. "You're about to witness the first practical demonstration of humanity's next evolutionary step." Evolutionary step. Marcus kept his weapon trained on the terrorist, though he was acutely aware of the dozen technicians who had stopped their work to watch. "You mean the elimination of free will?" "I mean the elimination of chaos," the Shadow Master corrected. "Do you know how many conflicts could have been prevented if people simply agreed on fundamental truths? How many resources have been wasted on disagreement and competition?" Blake moved to flank the terrorist while Marcus kept him talking. "And you get to decide what those fundamental truths are." "Someone has to," the Shadow Master said with what seemed like genuine sadness. "Humanity has proven incapable of making rational collective decisions. Climate change, nuclear proliferation, pandemic response, every major challenge requires cooperation, and cooperation requires consensus. I'm simply providing the mechanism for that consensus to emerge." Marcus saw Blake signal that he was in position. But before they could act, the Shadow Master pressed a button on a device he'd been holding. The entire facility shuddered. Unfortunately, "Our conversation will have to be brief," the Shadow Master said, as alarm klaxons began sounding throughout the complex. "The aerial delivery system launches in 10 minutes. Your government's joint session provides the perfect test case. Every decision-maker in one location, all breathing the same air." Marcus felt his heart drop. "You're not just targeting Congress. You're targeting everyone in the Capitol building. Senators, representatives, their staff, security personnel, journalists, approximately 3,000 people who will emerge from tonight's session with a much clearer understanding of their civic duties." The Shadow Master gestured to the technicians, who immediately began initiating shutdown procedures on their equipment. "Think of it as a proof of concept before we scale to larger populations." "Blake!" Marcus shouted. They moved simultaneously. Blake took out 2 technicians with his specialized equipment, while Marcus lunged for the Shadow Master. But the terrorist was faster than his appearance suggested, rolling away and coming up with a weapon Marcus had never seen before. Something that looked like a cross between a gun and a medical device. "I really hoped you'd understand," the Shadow Master said, firing. Marcus threw himself sideways, but whatever the weapon discharged wasn't a projectile. It was some kind of directed energy that made his muscles seize up temporarily. He crashed into a bank of monitoring equipment, sending sparks flying. Blake's covering fire forced the Shadow Master to take cover behind a chemical storage unit, but more armed figures were entering the amphitheater from exits Marcus hadn't noticed. They were dressed in the same tactical gear he'd seen at the warehouse, carrying the same energy weapons. "Tony!" Marcus called out, fighting off the effects of whatever had hit him. "Can you move?" "Restraints," Tony managed to say through gritted teeth. "Electronic locks?" Blake was engaged with 3 attackers, his conventional weapons barely effective against their energy shields. Marcus realized they needed a different approach. He rolled toward Tony's chair and found the control panel for the restraints, but instead of trying to unlock them, he jammed his tactical knife into the electronics, shorting out the system. Tony's restraints released with a snap. "Can you run?" Marcus asked. "Try and stop me," Tony replied, though he was clearly still fighting the effects of whatever they'd drugged him with. The Shadow Master had reached another control panel and was entering commands with practiced efficiency. 30 seconds to launch," he announced. "You cannot stop what's already in motion." Marcus looked up at the amphitheater's ceiling and saw something that made his blood run cold. A massive pneumatic system that led directly upward through the facility. Not just a delivery system, but a launch mechanism. "Blake! The ceiling! That's how they're getting the compound into the air." Blake followed his gaze and immediately understood. He pulled out his last explosive charge and began calculating angles. "If I can destabilize the launch mechanism." "Do it!" But the Shadow Master had anticipated this. "You would bring down this entire facility rather than allow progress?" he asked. "Very well. I had hoped to monitor the initial deployment personally, but the compound will deploy regardless." He pressed a final button and began moving toward an exit Marcus hadn't seen before, an elevator shaft hidden behind what had appeared to be solid wall. The helicopter, Marcus realized, he's got an extraction plan. As Blake's charges detonated above them, bringing down sections of the ceiling and damaging the launch mechanism, Marcus made a decision that would have seemed insane an hour earlier. He sprinted after the Shadow Master, leaving Blake to help Tony and ensure the facility's systems were fully disabled. The elevator was already rising, but Marcus managed to grab onto its external maintenance ladder just as it cleared the amphitheater level. Above him, he could hear the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors spinning up. The Shadow Master's voice drifted down the shaft. "You cannot stop the future, Agent Reed. You can only choose whether to be part of it." Marcus climbed faster, his muscles burning from the day's exertions and the lingering effects of the energy weapon. But as he reached the surface level and saw the helicopter preparing for takeoff, he knew this was his last chance to prevent a catastrophe that would change the nature of human consciousness forever. The aircraft lifted off just as Marcus reached the landing pad, but he was already committed to a course of action that defied every survival instinct he possessed. He jumped. Marcus's hands slammed against the helicopter's landing skid with bone-jarring force. For a terrifying moment, his grip slipped on the wet metal, and he felt himself sliding toward a 1,000-foot drop into the Virginia mountains. The aircraft's rotor wash battered him like a hurricane, making it nearly impossible to breathe or see. Above him, he could hear the Shadow Master shouting to his pilot, "Evasive maneuvers! Get him off!" The helicopter banked hard to the right, and Marcus felt his body swing out into empty air. His tactical training kicked in. He wrapped his legs around the skid and began pulling himself up toward the aircraft's cabin. Every muscle in his body screamed in protest, but the image of 3,000 government officials breathing neural modification compounds drove him forward. Through the helicopter's window, he could see the Shadow Master frantically working with some kind of control device. A backup deployment system, Marcus realized. Even with the underground facility damaged, the terrorist had contingency plans. The aircraft leveled out momentarily, and Marcus seized his chance. He pulled his sidearm and fired 3 shots through the cabin window, shattering the reinforced glass. The shots weren't aimed to kill. He needed the Shadow Master alive to understand the full scope of the plan, but they forced the terrorist away from his controls. "You cannot stop what you don't understand," the Shadow Master shouted over the rotor noise as Marcus hauled himself through the broken window. "This compound doesn't destroy free will, it optimizes it. It removes the cognitive biases that lead to poor decisions." Marcus landed hard inside the cabin, his weapon trained on the Shadow Master. The pilot was fighting to maintain control as wind whipped through the shattered window, but the aircraft remained airborne. "Cognitive biases?" Marcus had to shout to be heard. "You mean the things that make us human?" "I mean the evolutionary artifacts that made sense when humans lived in tribes of 50, but become catastrophically dangerous when scaled to populations of millions." The Shadow Master's eyes burned with absolute conviction. Fear of outsiders, preference for short-term rewards over long-term benefits, tribal loyalty over rational analysis. These traits are killing your species. The helicopter suddenly lurched as the pilot attempted another evasive maneuver. Marcus grabbed onto a safety harness to steady himself, never taking his weapon off the Shadow Master. "And you've appointed yourself to fix us?" Marcus demanded. "Someone has to?" The Shadow Master lunged not for Marcus, but for the control device he dropped when the window shattered. In 6 minutes, Congress begins its joint session. Every decision-maker who will shape your country's future for the next decade, all in one room. After tonight, they'll be capable of true rational thought. No more partisan politics. No more decisions based on fear or greed. Marcus dove for the device at the same time, and they collided in the aircraft's cramped cabin. The Shadow Master was stronger than his appearance suggested, and he fought with the desperate intensity of someone who believed the fate of humanity hung in the balance. They crashed into the helicopter's instrument panel, warning lights flashing as damaged systems began failing. The pilot shouted something about losing hydraulics, but Marcus barely heard him over the sound of his own pulse pounding in his ears. The Shadow Master managed to get his hands on the control device and began entering commands. Marcus could see a display showing the Capitol building, with wind patterns and atmospheric data scrolling past. Whatever backup deployment system this was, it was still operational. "Blake!" Marcus shouted into his throat mic, hoping the signal could reach his partner despite the distance and interference. "Congress! They need to evacuate the Capitol building now." But even as he said it, Marcus knew there wasn't time. Congress was already in session, the building sealed for security. Even if Blake could reach someone with authority, it would take too long to clear 3,000 people from the building. Marcus made a decision that went against every rule of engagement he'd ever learned. Instead of trying to stop the Shadow Master, he grabbed the terrorist in a chokehold and hauled him toward the shattered window. "What are you doing?" the Shadow Master gasped. "Something stupid," Marcus replied. "But sometimes stupid is all you've got." He pulled the pin from his last tactical grenade, not an explosive, but an electromagnetic pulse device designed to disable electronics. In the confined space of the helicopter cabin, it would fry every circuit in the aircraft, including whatever systems the Shadow Master was using for his backup deployment. "You'll kill us all!" the Shadow Master protested. "Maybe," Marcus said, "but I'll definitely stop you." He released the grenade and shoved the Shadow Master away from the control device. The terrorist made one last desperate lunge for the controls, but the EMP detonated before he could reach them. Every light in the helicopter died. The engines sputtered and went silent. In the sudden quiet, Marcus could hear only the whistle of wind through the broken window and the Shadow Master's labored breathing. They were falling. The pilot was fighting to restart the engines, but the EMP had fried the helicopter's electrical systems. They had maybe 30 seconds before they hit the mountainside below. "Emergency protocols," Marcus said, surprised by how calm his own voice sounded. He found the manual release for the aircraft's emergency parachute system, a backup that relied on mechanical rather than electronic triggers. The Shadow Master looked at him with something that might have been respect. "You would die to stop progress?" "I'd die to preserve choice," Marcus replied, pulling the emergency release. The helicopter's emergency chute deployed with a thunderous crack, jerking the aircraft upward and slowing their descent. It wasn't enough to ensure survival, but it might give them a chance. They hit the mountainside hard, the helicopter bouncing twice before skidding to a stop against a stand of pine trees. Marcus felt something crack in his chest, ribs probably, and tasted blood in his mouth, but he was alive. The Shadow Master wasn't moving. Marcus crawled over to check his pulse. Still alive, but unconscious, with what looked like a serious head injury from the impact. The pilot was groaning but responsive. Through the wreckage of the cabin, Marcus could see the control device the Shadow Master had been using. Its screen was dark, circuits fried by the EMP. Whatever backup deployment system it had controlled was offline. His throat mic crackled with Blake's voice. "Marcus! Marcus, respond." "Still here," Marcus managed, though speaking sent shooting pains through his chest. "Status report. The underground facility is secure. Tony's being treated for the drugs, but he's going to be okay. Julia's coordinating with hazmat teams to clean up the chemical storage areas." Blake paused. "What about the Shadow Master?" Marcus looked at the unconscious terrorist. Alive, contained, and his backup plan is permanently offline. The capital? Safe. Congress never knew how close they came. Over the next hour, as federal agents and medical teams reached the crash site, Marcus learned the full scope of what they'd prevented. The Shadow Master's organization had been larger than they'd realized. Cells in 7 countries, all working toward the same goal of cognitive optimization through biochemical means. But the neural modification compounds required precise delivery systems, and those systems had all been controlled from the underground facility Blake had destroyed. 3 weeks later, Marcus sat in a hospital bed, his ribs finally healed enough that he could laugh without agony. Blake and Julia had just finished briefing him on the cleanup operation. The Shadow Master's international network had been rolled up, his compounds destroyed, his research data secured. "So what happens to him?" Marcus asked. "Federal prison," Blake replied, though his lawyers are arguing he's mentally incompetent. They're claiming he genuinely believed he was saving humanity. Marcus thought about the conviction he'd seen in the Shadow Master's eyes, even as they fell from the sky together. Maybe he did believe that. Maybe that's what made him so dangerous. Julia, who'd been quiet through most of the briefing, finally spoke up. The psychological evaluations are interesting. He tested as having above-average empathy and genuine concern for human welfare. He wasn't a sociopath. He was a true believer. The worst kind of enemy, Marcus said quietly. Tony appeared in the doorway, looking healthier than he had since his capture. "Mind if I join the philosophy discussion?" "How are you feeling?" Marcus asked. "Like someone tried to rewire my brain," Tony replied with dark humor. "The doctors say the compounds he used were designed to suppress activity in the brain regions associated with emotional decision-making. Basically, he wanted to turn people into purely rational actors." "Sounds terrible," Blake said. Tony was quiet for a moment. "The scary part? For about 6 hours, while it was in my system, it felt peaceful. No anxiety, no second-guessing, no emotional conflicts. Just clear, logical thought." He shook his head. "I can understand why he thought he was doing good." Marcus stared out the hospital window at the Washington skyline. Somewhere out there, 3,000 government officials were going about their business, making decisions based on ambition, fear, loyalty, hope, and all the other messy human emotions that the Shadow Master had wanted to eliminate. It wasn't a perfect system, but it was theirs. "Any word on Director Hayes?" Marcus asked. "Plea bargaining," Julia replied. "Apparently, he wasn't a true believer. Just someone who got in too deep with the wrong people and couldn't find a way out." Marcus nodded. Betrayal motivated by weakness rather than conviction somehow seemed both better and worse than the Shadow Master's philosophical certainty. His secure phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. For a moment, Marcus felt his pulse spike, but the message was from the new acting director, offering him a commendation and a promotion. He deleted it without replying. Some victories were worth celebrating. Others were just reminders of how close civilization had come to losing something essential: the beautiful, chaotic, imperfect right to make their own mistakes. Outside his window, Washington continued its eternal dance of politics and power, driven by all the human flaws the Shadow Master had wanted to eliminate. Marcus had never been happier to see dysfunction in his life.